I think in a world of tolerance, where we're tolerant, it's actually good to know what other people think about, about things. And one reason is that you can better respect what they think about things. My sense is the charity is strictly towards helping people this way without. Bringing people together can. My name is Donald Daniel. I'm retired now. I worked for most of my career for the U.S. government, and then after I left the U.S. government, I worked for Georgetown University as a professor there. And just this past December, I taught my last class at Georgetown, and now I'm retired, although I'm working on a little project for the State Department on issues of peacekeeping and who does peacekeeping and so forth. My perspective partly is that of an American who feels that we need to have, let's call them Muslim faith-based movements that really focus on positive values. There seems that there are enough movements out there, that focus on other than positive values, that want to go out and, do things like September 11th or whatever. And instead here you have a movement that focuses on service and it focuses on tolerance. And I think that we need, I'm very positive about that, and I think we need movements that other Americans can look to and say, look, not all Muslims are bad people, or not all Muslims want to go out and kill people. There are lots and lots of good Muslims, and so they provide a positive image, and I think that's tremendously important. They need to continue doing that. Well, I think that there are lots of movements in the Islamic world that are, let's say, are charity-based, and I know Hizmet is charity-based as well. There are also lots of movements in the Islamic world that are education-based, and Hizmet does that as well. But the difference with, I think, the Hizmet movement is that my sense is the charity goes strictly towards helping people, if I could put it this way, without kind of a basic agenda behind that. Without, let's say, basically an agenda that might say, Muslims are good, but everybody else is bad, or something. I get that impression sometimes. But also particularly on the education side, though, I think seems to me, instead of so many of the other movements, strikes me as sponsor madrasas or sponsor Islamic education, and I've got nothing against Islamic education. But I think Hizmet is somewhat different in the sense that it also talks much, much more about math and science. There's also Islamic education, and there's time for that, but there's a much broader perspective, and I really like that broader perspective. And my impression is that the education movement and the charity movement is one that's also based on tolerance, where maybe some of these other movements aren't quite as tolerant. But I don't know enough about all of the other movements. I don't want to characterize all of the other movements. I'm just conscious about the fact that Hizmet is oriented towards tolerance, oriented towards a broad scope of education, which I think is a good thing, very good thing. I think anything that brings people together that have that are maybe, if I could put it this way, suspicious of one another, or sometimes when you don't know about something, you're suspicious of it more because you're ignorant, if I could put it this way of it. And I think anything that brings people together to talk about, let's say, issues of faith, particularly issues of value, so that people say, the Hizmet people, they have largely the same values that I have. We all want to have good societies. We all want to have tolerant societies. We all want to have educated societies. We all want our children to grow up to be productive members of society. And I think bringing people together can help foster this sense of respect for one another that otherwise gets overcome by ignorance or by fear, if I could put it this way. The other part of it is, I think, if I would say that I think maybe we need to even spend more time talking about our different religious perspectives, what we think about, frankly, what we think about God, what we think about, let's say in my case, Jesus Christ, in your case, Muhammad as the prophet and so forth, just so people better understand one another, and not that I'm going to try to convert any Muslim, and not that any Muslim should be trying to convert me, but I think in a world of tolerance, where we're tolerant, it's actually good to know what other people think about, about things. And one reason is that you can better respect what they think about things. I would never go out, for instance, and say something that would be considered derogatory towards, Muhammad. Towards your prophet, because I know how sensitive people are, and my sense would be, no, don't do that. We ought not to do that. And maybe people that don't have an understanding of each other's faiths may be not as tolerant, not as willing, to do that. Well, I think the thing that strikes me the most is the education program. I was extremely impressed by the schools that I saw, and but also seeing the children and their families, and how people were involved in it. So I think that's what strikes me the most, because I think if anything, I think the core to better societies, the core to better governance, the core to tolerance is good education. And I think that's what the Hizmet movement, is really contributing. I also saw occasion to see some of the hospitals, a hospital that they had in Istanbul and so forth. So that's good too, as a matter of fact. But I think when you're educating, you're really building a foundation to go ahead and improve society. Advertise Hizmet more, or advertise the perspective of the movement with its idea of tolerance, because I think that a lot of people, with good reason, don't always see the Muslims as being especially tolerant. And I think that's one reason why sometimes there's a fear, because they're afraid of this group, which is not a tolerant group. And Hizmet, it gives you a completely different image, let's say the dominant narrative sometimes that shows up on TV. Don't get me wrong, but Boko Haram is considered to be a Muslim movement. Well, is that the picture, if I were a Muslim, that I would want to see on TV? The answer is no, not really. Instead, I'd like to see the Hizmet schools on TV rather than a movement like Boko Haram or something like that. But what makes the news? Schools don't make the news. It's people that go out and do bad things that make the news. And I think that needs to be counterbalanced. The schools maintain their sense of tolerance as long as the schools focus, if I could put it this way, on teaching math and science, objective analyses, if you know what I mean. They're really making a positive contributions. I mean, just like in this country here and in other countries where, in some cities the best public schools happen to be the Catholic schools. It's the same kind of thing. And there again, they're teaching math and science and so forth, and they have a very good reputation. Because they're doing that. And to me, the Hizmet schools are kind of comparable to that, and the Hizmet schools are in so many different countries, and so are, let's call them Catholic schools, in so many different countries. And so I see there's an analogy between them, and it's a very positive development. We need more people doing that, in this world today. I think you talked about, that he had talked about disunity, poverty, and ignorance. Well, with the schools, he's trying to deal with the issue of ignorance by teaching them, analytical skills. He's tackling the poverty problem too, because he's developing people that can go out and be productive members of society. With his tolerance, which presumably pervades the school, he's trying to reduce the disunity, or he's trying to not so much say, look at the walls that separate us, but rather look at the things which are in common. There are still walls. I'm not a Muslim, and I'm not going to be a Muslim. That's just the reality of it. That kind of. But that's okay. What I mean is that doesn't mean that I can't sit to dinner with Muslims. I can't have them as friends. I'd love to go to Turkey, so that doesn't mean I'm not going to not go to Turkey. Because I am going to go to Turkey. But that doesn't mean I have to change you or you have to change me. But it means that if we can better understand each other, and if we are just simply, if I could put it this way, respecting one another, and the more you understand and the more respect, you overcome fear and ignorance. And I think that's still a real problem today, are those of fear and ignorance, I think. And I think that it seems to me that kind of thinking, which maybe started off more as social education among Hizmet followers or Gulen followers, is having an impact on people that have a capacity to engage in action. You know, for instance, like the prosecutors last December, the Turkish prosecutors, whatever the proper term is, procurators in last December, who kind of basically said, you know, there are people in Mr. Erdogan's administration that are corrupt. Maybe Mr. Erdogan's son maybe there's not, everything is not completely right there. And I think that's okay. You know what I mean is I think that if you are driven by your social beliefs, which happen to be, to my mind, positive beliefs, to try to come up with good governance, then I think that's a good thing. And maybe Mr. Gulen is going to be very careful he doesn't openly push this, but I'm glad to see that people are doing that. To me, the critical issue all over the world today, the most important issue, is the issue of good governance. If you can get good governance, all sorts of other things follow. If you don't get good governance, then you get real problems. And I think Turkey's running, you know, and that's the sad part to me for Turkey today. You know, I was happy to tell people, let's say 5 years ago, look at Turkey. It's a Muslim country, it's a participatory democracy. They've got it, they got it right. They know what they're doing. You know, and actually I was very high. I thought, and Erdogan seems to be the guy behind this, so I actually think he was a real hero. And now I say in 5 years that dream it's no longer a dream, you know, the dream has been lost and Turkey needs to get it back. And so if activists in Turkey are reflecting their social understanding from the Gulen movement to say, hey, we need to have government that's not corrupt. We need to change the system and make it more participatory and truly democratic. I think that's a positive thing and actually should be encouraged, to my mind.